Hi guys, very welcome to Mentor and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing fantastic out there. Today on the podcast, do pilots get subjected to drug testing and alcohol testing? And what happens if they fail one of those tests? And also, towards the end, do we get speed tickets? Stay tuned. Right guys, so I want to start this episode, since we're talking about the use of illicit drugs and alcohol, by just stating a few things. If you are considering to become part of the airline industry, and specifically flying passengers around in big, quick, heavy aircraft at high altitude, there's a couple of things that you need to understand. All right. You need to understand that you could, on any given day, depending on the aircraft size, be transporting hundreds, if not thousands, of passengers. All of those passengers have their lives, their relatives, their children, their friends. It's a potential huge impact on a lot of people. Okay. You need to understand that you, as a pilot, have a responsibility towards the traveling public, towards every one of those passengers, to be in the best possible shape you can be in order to get the passengers to their destination in a safe way. All right. So this is the mindset that you need to have before you choose to use any illicit drugs or use of alcohol in connection to your flight. Okay, so that's the first thing that I want to say when it comes to this. You need to use your common sense. As with everything in this business, it's all about common sense. Okay, so having said that, we all know that pilots are people. Now, pilots, they do go out with their friends, they do attend weddings, they do go to dinner parties, and they do consume alcohol. It's perfectly legal. However, there are some restrictions to it. Now, the restrictions, they do unfortunately vary a little bit all over the globe. So the restrictions to how much alcohol you can have in your blood and still be legally flying is different. In the United States, it's around the same limits as driving a car, or I think it's 0.03 of promille. Don't quote me on that. I think it's around there. In the UK, it's significantly lower than the limit for driving a car, and in India, for example, it is an absolute zero tolerance for alcohol in the blood. Okay. When it comes to company rules, they are also a little bit varying, but the lowest that I've ever seen is what's called 8 hours of bottle to throttle, which means an 8-hour abstinence of any kind of alcohol consumption before flight. Now, most airlines have a significantly stricter policy than that. So count on 12 hours at least. And when they say 12 hours bottle to throttle, it means you still have to use your common sense, like I was talking about. It's not like you can down a bottle of whiskey 12 hours before you're flying, because you will still be under the influence of alcohol then. So be smart. Okay, realize your responsibility and be smart. So what kind of enforcement will you be facing then? Well, most of the time this is down to the local aviation authorities and the local police. All right, they are the ones that are making sure that this is being checked. Now, I should say that the alcohol tests are very infrequent. Okay, I have during my career only seen a few, but they do happen. And what tends to happen then is that the police tends to come into the crew room prior to a flight and do a breathalyzer test. There are, on some occasions, I have actually heard of the police coming on board into a cockpit to do a breathalyzer test as well, but that tends to be in connection with a report that they have received from either the traveling public or from someone working in security, safety, or a gate agent, where they've actually seen that someone is acting in a strange way or maybe smelling alcohol. This is an important point if you're part of the traveling public, that if you feel something like that, if you pass a pilot and it smells like alcohol or whatever, you can always tell the local security guard or gate agent or something to get it checked. Because as soon as there is a report being sent in about that, there is a mandatory check. Okay, they will send someone out to make sure that that's happening, and that tends to be I'm sure you've all seen the videos on YouTube about pilots being filmed by CCTV in security checks acting in a erratic manner. Those tends to be the ones caught because someone in security control or gate agent or the crew can also report this. That's how they've been tested. Then found in some cases being under influence. All right. So yes, the police can do testing, local authorities can do testing, but the company can do that testing as well. And when it comes to the enforcement of making sure that pilots and cabin crew are not using illicit drugs, it tends to be the company that handles that. I have seen pilots and cabin crew being tested by hair samples. So they've been coming in from a flight, and there has been a crew, like a drug testing crew there waiting for them, and everyone has been, giving hair. Obviously that will show not only if you've been using drugs during that particular day, but it will show a prolonged period to see that there's not been any drug use during a long period of time, for as long basically as the hair has been growing. And the obvious questions will be, what if you're bald? Well, they will find the hair somewhere. Anyway, so what happens to you then? Let's say that they do a breathalyzer test and you are found to have alcohol in your breath. Well, then you will be, just like in the case of you've been taken off the road in your car, it's likely that they will take you in to take a blood sample and check the blood sample to get confirmation. The same goes for drugs, okay? They will have a simple drug test to show likelihood of drugs being in your system, and if that's positive, you will be taken in to get a drug sample taken either by hair or by blood. Okay. The same goes for your annual medical test and for your initial medical test, depending on where you are in the world. Me, for example, who are doing my medical checks in Spain, I have to be subjected to a drug test every single year. If I get older, then this medical test will be twice a year, so it will be 2 drug tests per year. So, if that would be found to be positive, well, then I wouldn't get my medical and I wouldn't be able to fly. Now, if you are found to be under the influence of alcohol, their rules differs between different airlines, okay? Most airlines have a zero tolerance policy to this, but since alcoholism is considered to be a disease, in some airlines you will obviously be taken offline. You will not be able to fly, but you might be offered to go into a program to help you get rid of your alcohol problems, okay? But in some airlines you might be just dismissed, okay? When it comes to use of illicit drugs, marijuana, opioids, methamphetamine, all of these like hardcore drugs, they tend to be a zero tolerance policy, as in if you are tested and confirmed to have that in your system, it's a breach of contract and you will be let go from the company. Okay, so this just goes to confirm what I said earlier in the video, which is make sure that you're not into this. Okay, make sure that you don't get into a situation where you have to sit and sweat and hope that trip you took to Cancun 6 months ago is not showing up. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. Okay, and you are the one who are in charge of the safety of all of those passengers. They are trusting in you not to be under any kind of influence. All right, so think about that if you are attending a party and you're supposed to be flying 2 days later as well. Also think of the fact that even if you don't have alcohol still in your system, you might feel a bit sluggish, you're not as quick as you should be, and you should be on your best when you're flying. So, just remember that. Okay? Right, I promised in the beginning of the video that I was going to talk about speed tickets as well. And yes, pilots can get speed tickets. I bet you didn't know that. There are two types of speed violations that you can be found to have done. All right. First is flying. Okay, there are speed restrictions during your flight. During flights in controlled airspace under flight level 100, we have a 250 rule generally in Europe at least. Most of the world, I would say. But then you have specific speed restrictions as part of the procedures you're flying as well. And they are actually being monitored by radar. Now, if you are not following a speed restriction while you're flying, you might lose separation with traffic around you. You might not be able to do turns, which means that you might infringe on certain airspace that you shouldn't be in. That will be reported to your airline by air traffic control. So they will be complaining, and it will not actually, in most cases, not be a financial sanction unless you're violating noise. Okay, there are specific noise stations around most major airports around the world, and if you infringe on them, there can be some really severe fines being made towards the airline. Okay, a lot of money. But you can actually you'll be fined for speeding when you're taxiing as well. In most places you have taxi speed limits. Okay, they tend to be, in my airline for example, we have a speed limit of 30 knots in a straight line. We have 10 knots while we're going through corners, and it's a speed limit of 15 knots when you're on the apron. Now that 15 knots restriction close to the apron might be enforced by the airport as well. So for example, here where I'm sitting now in London Stansted, they used to have police with actual speedometers, lasers, checking the speed of the aircraft taxiing by, and if it was going over that 15 knots limit at the beginning of the apron, the individual pilot would actually get a speed ticket. I'm not sure now if it was actually money that they had to pay, but they would definitely get a note that was sent through the airline to that specific pilot saying that on this occasion you were speeding. Don't do that, right? So the airline business in some ways is very similar to driving on the road as well. Guys, I hope you like this one. Send in questions as always. I hope you have subscribed. There will be much more videos coming up, and I'm actually sitting here now in an airport on my way going up to Dublin to do some more interesting videos that is coming up very, very soon. If you haven't already, download the Mentour Aviation app. It's completely free, and we have a great community in there now, chatting away, asking questions to each other, answering questions. There's loads of actual pilots in there who are flying both Airbus and Boeing that can answer any questions you might have. There's also flight students in there. So if you're on the way going into flight training and you want to know about ATPL theory, stuff like that, then just go into the chat, talk about that. And also, get yourself one of my collections to learn how to set up the Boeing 737, for example. For now, I hope you're all having an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.